Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday webinar brought to you by Hire and Talentful. For anyone who is new, my name is Kelly McGrath-Smith. I am the Community Director at Hire. We're delighted to have you here today for one of our lovely Wednesday webinars. If you aren't in Hire, maybe you don't know who we are. We are a global community for internal talent and HR folk. We've got over 11,000 members now at the moment and growing, which is absolutely fantastic. It's one of the reasons we do the webinars at this time of the day to try and catch as many different time zones as we can, but all of our webinars are also available on a replay as well. So I guess just to let you know a little bit more about Hire. So we are a global Slack community, but we also have so much more than just what's going on in Slack. So we do in-person breakfasts, we do dinners, we do virtual roundtables, and then of course we do our webinars as well. And part of the mission and the goal of Hire is really to help up-level the industry. So that is why we try and give as much back to the community. We try and host, as many value-add events as we can. If you aren't a member, if you don't know how to join, I've just popped a little link below. So if you head to hirehq.com, you will be able to sign up and join in on the conversation and find out more about the various events that we hold and see how you can take part as well. Another thing to bear in mind, excuse me, with Hire is we know that sometimes working in TA and HR can sometimes feel like a little bit of a lonely role, especially if maybe you're in a standalone role or, you're managing a team for the first time. So it's really a space where you can connect with peers. You can, float ideas past people if you're not sure about various topics, such as progression planning, which we'll talk about today. And there's always someone who will happily kind of jump on a call with you. You can get various intel from other folks as well. So it's definitely worth joining, no matter what stage of your journey you are at. But bringing us to today, so I'm delighted to be joined by Luke Victor. So Luke is working at Cleo, and Cleo have a transparent progression framework. So our conversation today is going to be around progression planning, managing one-to-ones in terms of best practice, and also how you get the best from your teams as well. So without further ado, I will hand over to Luke in a moment just to introduce himself. But one thing I just wanted to say before we start for anyone joining is please do drop in any comments, questions as we go. If there's anything that you're wondering about, we will either answer them as we're going through the conversation or we will answer them at the end during a Q&A as well. So Luke, maybe you can give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself and let us know who you are.
Of course. Well, thank you for the introduction, Kelly. As said, I'm Luke. I'm the talent lead here at Cleo for engineering and data. So if you've never heard of Cleo, do go look us up. We are a startup company building an AI financial advisor to help people start to improve their financial literacy and have a better relationship with money. So all very topical stuff to deal with at the moment. My role is effectively to lead our tech talent team. So that's covering data science, product analytics, and software engineering. I've been doing tech recruitment for what feels like a lifetime now across various different companies within agency, executive search, RPO, and internal. And that's ended up with me here at Cleo.
Amazing. Gosh, you've covered the full spectrum of tech recruitment. Well, it's brilliant to have you here. And I think, within the community, speaking around progression planning and one-to-ones has come up quite a lot in terms of, what are various companies doing? How can we do it better? And I think just hearing from other folks in terms of what's going on in their companies can really help from, people figuring out how they may be able to tweak it and actually the value of it within different companies as well. And so maybe you can just start by telling us like a little bit more around Cleo's transparent progression framework and, what it actually means for people who work there.
Yeah, of course. So obviously, first thing to note is our progression frameworks are fully transparent. You can see them on our website, and we fully encourage people to use that as a jumping off point if you're going to make your own. The first thing I think is important to is define what a progression framework is. This is very much a plan for individual growth that details both behaviours and skills required to do a job. It's not a job description. It's not that prescriptive. I think we all know, especially if you're working in a startup or scale-up organization, job roles can change, focuses can change, and therefore, we're not focusing a progression plan on the outputs, but on the inputs. So it's this step-by-step guide for what's expected at each level, which then gives people an understanding of what they need to do to perform in that job, and what they need to do to progress to a higher level. Typically, the best ones I've seen are a linear progression of skills as well. So if we're talking about talent, for instance, you might say that a junior member of the team should be aware of the team's OKRs, if that's the structure you use for goal setting. But a senior member of the team should be actually helping to shape those OKRs and drive the team to achieve those goals. Now, the core skill there is strategic thinking and planning, which is something you develop over your career. So the progression plan ensures that you're not getting to a certain level and are expected then to pick up new behaviours and new skills at the drop of a hat, but actually you're furthering the skills that you've been building on over your career up to that point. And there's massive benefits to having a proper career progression framework, such as the one we use at Cleo. It's improved talent attraction because people understand exactly what they're getting into before they join. It improves retention because people are completely aware of what they need to do a good job and progress. And again, it then removes that subjectivity, and so on and so forth. And we use this as a starting point to manage people's progression and development. And what we can do, obviously in this call, is dig into a bit more about how to use that overarching framework to build something more personal for an individual. But first thing to do is have that kind of overarching framework to know, okay, well, what does good look like at each level? And then you can start looking at kind of zooming in, deciding, who needs what, which areas do people need to progress into.
Amazing. And I've popped in the chat as well a link to Cleo's transparent framework as well for anyone who wants to take a look as we're talking through. And I guess maybe it would be worth looking at, that kind of alignment of personal behaviours with professional growth, and, how progression planning and framework can really help with that kind of holistic overview of someone's career development experience.
Of course. So I'd say the wider company progression frameworks will often be very skills based, because they're looking at the skills that are needed for an individual to perform in that job and therefore add value to a company. You can then take it one step further by building kind of personal development plans built off the back of these frameworks. And what you're looking to do then is tie together personal development with professional development. Personal development, I find, is more often than not behavioural. People want to progress in their careers. Their careers might not always be with one company. It might not always be in the same job. And therefore saying, I want to be better at sourcing candidates is great in your current job, but actually in 20 years' time, you might not be doing that. So what you're looking into is how you go about researching and being proactive and being creative. They're the behaviours that you're looking at. And so what I do with my team at the moment is I build personal development plans where we pick up on the behaviours that people want to develop and they want to advance. And what we then do is we tie those behaviours to skills required to do the job. So you want to get better at stakeholder management. That might mean using data to tell a story, and one of our skills required to do a good job in talent is to be data-driven. So how can we start putting that person into an opportunity, an environment where they can further that skill set, and by doing so, they're advancing that behaviour. So we're tying together both the skills and the behaviours needed, and again, that's holistic development of the individual.
And do you find that also helps with, I guess, getting people's buy-in from like overarching company goals as well, if it's able to kind of filter down to them to be like, this is the company mission, the company goal this year, this is how it affects you, and kind of breaking it down into those kind of personal development areas as well as professional?
Definitely, and I think every company wants to be mission driven. Every company wants their staff to be backing the mission, but and most cases that will happen. There's always going to be something underlying in a human being to be advancing their own career and their own development first and foremost. And so if you can tie personal progression to progression in the job, and progression in the job is then tied to impact and value add, then yes, it all starts to make a lot more sense. I think people also do get bought into what they're doing in a bit more depth, because you're giving meaning to the actions you undertake. I think particularly if we look at talent as a an area, and it's obviously where I spent my career, so know a little bit more about it. But fundamentally, we're all here to make hires. That's going to be the bottom line requirement for anyone in the space. But no one wants to be targeted on just how many hires you make on a month-by-month basis and expect that number to go up as you progress. There's so many other things that you have to look at that make people a better talent partner, and that will often be driven by these changes in behaviours. And so, by doing that, by focusing on what someone can do on a personal level, then it might not necessarily mean they're making 5-10 more hires a month, but they're doing everything else better that will then make them a better partner to the business, and again, hopefully start to advance their understanding of the overall goals.
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully helps with their kind of own engagement as well. Is there any kind of maybe examples you can share in terms of, maybe times where you did focus on that more behavioral side of things and you've noticed like improvements when it comes to team dynamics, performances, any kind of examples maybe you could share with us?
Yeah, no, of course. So as I mentioned before, there was the example I chose about wanting to be better at stakeholder management. That's happened. People in my team wanting to be able to engage stakeholders and influence them. And that's the behaviour, that's the skill. How to influence people, how to win them over, how to bring them on a journey. And we use data as the driver for that. We're a very data-driven organisation, and there's instances where when people can't handle stakeholders, it's because they're not able to find the data that's needed to tell a story, and then kind of utilize that to actually make that influence. So what I've done in instances like that is start to build a plan, initially focusing on self-directed learning, where that individual might go away and do some of their own research into data, run some reports on our ATS and just try and be a bit more familiar, a bit more literate with what's going on. From there, we can start getting them to shadow other people when they're having these very data-driven conversations and understand the nuances of what they're doing. And it's setting end goals fundamentally. So the end goal might be running, deep dives into the conversion stats over a 6-month period and getting buy-in to change part of the interview process. And that's ultimately stakeholder management, because what you're doing there is you're getting the buy-in to make change, and you're bringing them on that journey and getting them in agreement. So that's what I've seen work very well in the past. Small iterative goals, but with that end goal in mind. And doing that, that example led to a big increase in overall team dynamics too, because the workload could then be shared out a lot more evenly, and people can then start to augment what the others are doing, rather than just having these kind of siloed skill sets where one person's good at A and one person's good at B. Instead, everyone can be good at everything, and then you start to push each other up accordingly.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear kind of how it comes together as well, and actually the benefits to the wider team too. One of the things that we always like to do on the webinars as well is kind of look at also, practical steps, takeaways for people who are watching who, it doesn't matter what stage you're at when it comes to progression planning within your team. I think we can all kind of take inspiration from others. But I guess if we're looking at an instance where there's someone looking to actually, start creating a bit of a progression plan or a progression framework, like what would you kind of look at in terms of the key initial steps that they might start to take?
Good question. First thing I would say is crowdsource this piece of work. There's not many ways to skin a cat, so to say, and I think there's a lot of companies that will put out their frameworks publicly. There'll be a lot of resources that will tell you what to do. Rely on each other, and I think Hire as a community kind of can help elicit that by bringing people together and actually having conversations. I'm always more than happy to speak to people about Cleo's framework, and people have reached out to say they've used that as a basis of their own. So use what's out there first and foremost. But I think for whatever framework you're looking to build, the core thing to do is understand the skills required to do that job. Using a framework as a kind of similar to a job description is a good starting point. Obviously, you need to advance that a lot, but you need to work out, okay, what does good look like at each level? What is this person undertaking on a day-to-day basis, and what skills underpin that? So it does have to be quite a measured affair. You've got to get buy-in from lots of people. This isn't something that one person should sit in a dark room and do. This is something that should be a communal, collaborative piece of work. And once you've built that framework, then you can start looking at actually the progression between the steps and how to get people on that journey. There's no point sitting down with someone saying, I want you to improve X, Y, and Z, and that's going to get you a promotion if you don't know what the promotion actually is. So yeah, if established companies, you can definitely do it by just speaking to people and finding out what people are doing. Newer companies use what's already out there, because a talent partner at Cleo won't be too dissimilar to a talent partner somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And it's something we see quite a lot in the hire community, people asking, who's done X, Y, and Z before? Do you have anything that you can share? Can you hop on a call? Because actually, by and large, there will always be someone else out there who has done it. And actually, sometimes if you try and start something completely from scratch, especially if it's unknown to you, it'll take you so long to do it. And actually, like you said, if you seek inspiration from others, see what's already out there in terms of transparent frameworks, hop on a call with someone in a community just to, figure out maybe what nuances you might have in your business or how other people implemented it. And I get kind of sticking with that kind of implementation side of things. Maybe we can look at maybe some of the pitfalls or challenges that can come with setting up a progression plan. And I don't know if you've maybe been part of businesses where there hasn't been progression frameworks, or they've been a little bit woolly, but maybe you can kind of talk on the points around what might be a common challenge if someone is a kind of starting point with progression planning.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of pitfalls, to be honest, but not to scare people away. They're all quite overcomable, I'd say. I think fundamentally that the point is not to be too prescriptive. Ensure that the frameworks can evolve with the business too. I've worked in some businesses that just didn't have a framework, and some that were very standardized, based around years of experience as the only kind of data point used to decide on seniority. And I think, as we spoke about before, it's not just about the skills, it's about the behaviours that underpin those. And as companies grow, the roles will grow, the behaviours will need to grow. So you've got to have some flexibility there. Myself and a colleague, a couple of months ago, we were writing a progression framework for talent sources in the team. And we had to kind of really balance our, own expectations with what the sources are actually doing. And it's kind of making sure that actually what's in there is achievable, realistic as well, and knowing that there can be some change in the future. And that again goes back to that point around collaboration. If you're not doing the job, it's very difficult to know exactly what that person's doing with every second of their day. So we get people to map out what they're doing and look at the high performance in the team. I think when implementing new frameworks, and if you're kind of doing this from scratch, sometimes it can change as performance management frameworks change or processes change. And again, I think it shows that you need buy-in from the whole business. You need the people team in there. You need the domain knowledge in there to do so. But again, if people aren't fully backing this framework as a vehicle to progress people, then it just won't work fundamentally. Once you've got it in place, obviously it's great. People should get bought into it because they can see the benefits of their own progression. And then, as I said, you start to build something more personal for the individual. And again, it all comes down to how realistic the targets are. We use SMART goals as kind of, individual OKR and goal setting, and that's ensuring that goals are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. I think, again, having this overarching framework of this is a junior, this is a mid, this is a senior, how to get someone to that point in small iterative steps where they can know not just, point A to point Z, but actually how to every individual bit in the middle. That's more for the individual to understand how to get there in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that kind of breakdown as well, kind of on an individual basis. I mean, I've worked in businesses where we've had different iterations of progression plans. And I think sometimes when they get relaunched, there's maybe half a group of people who are like, this is amazing. This one is perfect. I love how this plan. And then another half is like, oh gosh, I'm not sure I can get my head around this. So maybe you can speak to that kind of managerial side of things where you have some resistance in the team. Like, how do you start to almost get that buy-in from team members who maybe liked the old way or they've never done it before? Where might you start there?
Yeah, good question. So, and candidly, it's not something I've come up against too much. As I said, Cleo's had a progression framework since long before I've been here, and other companies I don't think were quite set up in a way to do so in the right way. But for me, if we zoom out a little bit and we kind of define what the manager's role is, for me, it's always about developing the staff. It's about coaching and management and driving engagement, and therefore it's my job to work with my team to make them better. And making them better doesn't just mean making them better at the job that I expect them to do, because I know that they're not going to spend their whole lives at Cleo. So it's about how to make them better professionals, and therefore by me putting my time and energy into their development and using this plan as a guideline to start doing that, typically, you get buy-in from people there. So tying it to their own progression, be it monetary or in terms of seniority and leadership, is a start, but tying it to their general development, I think is a really important way of making sure people believe in it and they're not just paying lip service to the business. But saying that, fundamentally, I think development does need to be self-led, and people have to buy into their own development. So if they don't, for whatever reason, they're not worried about progression, then that's on the individual. If they want it in a very, very different way, then I don't think there's a silver bullet to get them round to the way of thinking of the business. I think it might just be a bit of a slow burn to talk to them about the benefits of things, but also you've got to understand where they're coming from too. You've got to understand why they may be reticent to adopt this new framework, or why they're keen to stick with the older ways of doing things, because there'll be a reason why that's the case. If you can understand that, you can understand how to get around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of comes and kind of ties in quite nicely to the next part of the conversation around one-to-ones, because of course we all know that progression planning is not just this kind of one-off thing that you touch once a year. Like, it has to be linked within your one-to-ones throughout your whole year working with someone, so that people understand the goals they're working towards, what they're doing, and like you said, you've got that buy-in, you've got that trust, so you can figure out if there is resistance, where does it come from. But speaking on one-to-ones, I guess, from your experience in terms of how you use Cleo's framework and how you work with progression, what do you feel is kind of the ideal frequency of one-to-ones, and how does it kind of vary based on team members? And I totally get that this will be quite individual to various companies, so I guess what we're talking about here is not necessarily one size fits all, but maybe how you view it and what's worked for you.
Definitely. What's worked for me is frequent one-to-one. So I do one 30 minutes every single week as a starting point. I think it's really important to have that FaceTime with the individual. I try and do it in person, but that's because we have hybrid working, so there's opportunities to be in person. As you said, that there's not one size fits all. I think it depends on the nature of the team and the cadence of meetings anyway. If you're daily stand-up with your team, then you might not need a weekly one-to-one. If you're speaking to them in 5 meetings on a day, you might not need a weekly one-to-one. But I find it's very useful with the size of the team that I've got. Obviously, there gets to a point where weekly isn't a tenable idea because your team might be too big. I think at that point, if you've got levels of hierarchy within your team, if someone's kind of taking more delivery management responsibilities away from you, then you can maybe start to stagger them a little bit. But I'd say no more than bi-weekly, because I think it's so important to have that FaceTime and have that touch point. On top of that, then what I'd typically say is every 2 months or so, you do a longer session, a deep dive into proper progression and performance. I tend to do that in the form of PDP, so a personal development plan, separate document that we work off away from the one-to-one, and that's again looking at long-term behavioural change and skills development, and then coupled with all the performance management meetings that we have throughout the year in terms of bi-monthly reviews and kind of annual performance reviews and things like that. So there's always lots of conversations about performance and progression, and you do need to be aware of not overdoing it, because I don't think there's much point talking about progression every single week, because not a lot can change in that cadence. But yeah, lots of touch points I find is really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you were saying, sometimes having specific one-to-ones that are focused on a particular topic, like like you said, one that is more focused on progression can really help as well. When it comes to I guess, your more general one-to-ones, so the weekly ones that you're doing. How do you kind of balance, I guess, kind of talking through, the main objectives, what people are working on, the key tasks, but also that other side of it, be it, personal development, professional development, or just kind of getting to know that person and kind of building that rapport? Like, how do you kind of balance that yourself when it comes to those, I guess, the shorter 30-minute weeklies that you do?
So with those, I'm fairly bullish on this, to be quite honest, with my team, but I do appreciate there's nuance in different companies. I always say that I don't want the one-to-one to be anything to do with the BAU work updates. I say to my team, I want them to be autonomous. I want them to be empowered to make their decisions and have a level of trust. That means if there's an update that I should know about, you'd let me know anyway. If things are going badly, if things are going well, let me know. Let's share the successes, share the struggles. And then the one-to-one can be purposed entirely on well-being and development.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, it's well-being. It's how is that person doing, and that comes in the form of a very unstructured, very conversational interaction of talking about how they're doing, how their week's going, what's going on, personal life, professional life, what they're enjoying, what they're struggling with, and you build that trust. So it feels like a very natural conversation. There might then be, say that's 10 minutes. There might then be 10 minutes of business updates that I need to give, or chasing up, a larger piece of work, or kind of checking in on something. Not, how much work have you done this week, but actually this is an ongoing project for 6 months or whatever. Keen to get your thoughts on this, or this is something from the VP that we need to start rolling out. So that's always important to make sure there's an opportunity to speak about those things. And then again, it's kind of using me as a manager as a point of escalation. So seeing what they're struggling with, talking through it, asking what they actually want to do as a plan of action. Being a point of escalation isn't just taking problems away and solving them; it's working with the individual to solve them together. So again, that's a really useful kind of way of, I think, structuring the issues that they might be facing as blockers to deal with, rather than just tell me what you've done and tell me what you're going to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess on that piece, you've got to have that, I guess, trust built as well. Is there anything kind of from your side in terms of, building trust and having those transparency in the meetings? Is there anything that you find, kind of has worked for you in terms of really kind of establishing those relationships? Because, let's be honest, we're all humans. When you're working with someone, it takes time to, open up to them. And whether you're working hybrid or remote, sometimes there might be, barriers in place. If you're completely remote with someone versus in person, it might take a bit longer. But anything that's maybe worked for you that you found really helpful for that kind of trust and transparency side?
Yeah, no, great question. I think there's a couple of things that I've seen have worked really well. Firstly, just being a human being, having that conversation, the little bits of chit chat, it sounds super cliche, don't get me wrong, but asking how your weekend's been and stuff like that, you start to get an idea of what that person's like. You can have a conversation about it once you start to build up that knowledge base. But I think just being transparent with my own work as well. I think in most instances, being a manager isn't just an evolution of an IC role. It's a different skill set fundamentally, and it's one that obviously a lot of people move into, and it's a very doable one. But my job is different to what the job of my team is, and therefore I think it's really important that I then am honest and open about what I'm doing. Give them updates on what work I'm doing so they have a better understanding of my day-to-day. Tell them what I'm struggling with. What's annoyed me this week, or what am I can't get my head around. Speak to them and actually then start to form a really strong partnership to have different ways of thinking, different viewpoints that can actually then start to overcome blockers, but also build trust. And I think that's really it. It's just about being very candid and conversational and being very open. And then, it's always kind of yielded dividends with me.
Yeah. And I think what really makes a difference in terms of like what you were saying as well, it's not having every one-to-one about tasks and BAU, because then that person doesn't really have the space to open up if something is going on for them, if their numbers have dropped, for example, but the space has never been created for them to say, hey, look, this is going on in my personal life.
And sometimes a one-to-one might be derailed by someone who's needing to have a bit of a moan for half an hour. And that's fine, because, sometimes people just need to get it out. And rather my team has the trust in me to do that for half an hour, then they take that home with them, and then they're disengaged and they're miserable. So I think just using the one-to-one to again focus on well-being, and that could be professional, that could be personal, whatever it is, but making sure that when you come out of that session, be it 30 minutes or whatever, you're both feeling better about things.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone who has tuned in live, if you have any questions or comments on anything that we've covered, please drop it in the chat. One final question for me was just in terms of your meeting that is specifically focused around progression planning. How long is that in comparison to the others? And maybe is there like a rough structure in terms of how you run that?
Yeah, so typically I do kind of 45 minutes for that session. I think a 1 hour one-to-one meetings, whatever you're talking about, can feel quite lengthy. In terms of structure, it varies dependent on the individual. I don't think there's much point saying, here's a progression framework, here's 20 skills, let's chat through each one of them. It's about kind of pinpointing, I think, a few things to speak about each time you do it. And that's not always the things they're weakest at. Often it might be that as a starting point of, this is something that you're not doing well in. How can we get over that? How can we kind of work together on that to improve the behaviours that will improve the skills? Sometimes it might be stuff that they're doing great at. And the conversations then, okay, well, how do you start, doing that even more to fuel your own progression, or how do you start sharing that with the team? So typically I try and take, understand what they want from their own progression first. And, even though I know that from my team, I still check in on that because things change, motivations change. So check in on that. You pick 3 or 4 areas that you want to chat about in terms of how to, or what to focus on. And tie that into the actions that they then undertake over the next couple of months. And then you agree on a plan, agree on those small iterative goals, and take it from there.
Amazing. Well, it's been really interesting to hear, how you folks do it at Cleo. And I think it's good, like you said, for people to just check out what other companies are doing. I think, don't start something from scratch when you can get inspiration elsewhere. Luke, you're also in the hire community, so people can maybe find you there if they've got a question off the back of this, or connect with you on LinkedIn. I've popped in a link anyway, like I said. So underneath this webinar, if you're watching it on LinkedIn Live, there is a link to Cleo's transparent progression framework. If you're watching the replay somewhere else, like YouTube, for example, if you go onto Cleo's career page, you'll be able to navigate it in that way as well. Because it's always great to see these things and just, like we said, get a little bit of inspiration. On that note, I'm just going to chat to you all about what webinar we've got coming up next week, because we do them every Wednesday. So next week we've got a panel talk, and we're specifically looking at engagement and retention. So looking at, how do we start to really look at engaging and retaining our top performers now that the market might be shifting? What are some key strategies for really getting that kind of buy-in from your team? And it kind of ties into this conversation as well, in terms of, looking at people's individual goals and motivations as well. So we've got a brilliant panel joining us. So it'll be at 4:00 UK time and 8:00 PST, which is San Fran, and around 11:00 in New York. So do join us for that one. And like I said, for anyone who is new to hire, I'll pop a little link below. I really like this banner because it just reminds me of like a news program. Top headlines, head to hirehq.com. But you can find us all in there. There's more details about events that we run in person and online as well, depending on where you are in the world. Like I said, we've got breakfast, dinners, virtual roundtables, and lots more to come next year as well. If you work in internal TA and HR, please do head over and join, and we would love to see you in there. But Luke, thank you so much for today. It's been such a great conversation. It's been really interesting to hear, your perspective on progression planning and what you do over at Cleo. And hopefully we will see you again soon, and have more conversations with you in the community as well.
Of course. Well, yeah, thank you very much for having me. And yeah, just to reiterate Kelly's point, I think Hire definitely is a community. I think it's always good to chat with the people about what's going on. So more than happy to field any questions about what we're doing at Cleo, and hopefully find out about what's going on elsewhere in terms of progression and management as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you all for joining, and hopefully see you all again next week. See you, everyone. Bye.